As you fund a voucher program, you are taking away from a public education program. It's Bob Popinski. I'm the Senior Director of Policy at Raise Your Hand, Texas.
Very good. Okay, well, Bob, I'm going to begin with sort of. I want you to peel back the layers if you could, because I know we're easing back in after a long holiday break, but the session is now really within view. So,
It
tell me
is.
what the next few days look like as the session is getting closer, and then once the session starts, what does that look like from your perspective for your agency?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll back it up a little bit too, because really since 2019, there has not been any significant changes to school funding or really even education policy since 2019, since the last legislative session. So in that time, a year leading up to this session, a vast majority of school districts have had to adopt deficit budgets. They've had to cut programs. They've had to reduce staff. And in some cases, they've had to close campuses. So what Raise Your Hand Texas has continued to do is try to inform our communities, our business leaders, our advocates on an array of public education policy issues so that they can be engaged with our elected officials during this 89th legislative session. That's the most important thing. As they gear up, they want to hear from those back in their community. So we've monitored school budgets, our teacher workforce, which has over 380,000 teachers, and our assessment and accountability system in the hopes that as we kind of see about 1,000 bills filed on public education policy this legislative session, that we can see significant improvements for our 5.5 million kids in our state. And so it's a lot. We've got a lot. The first 60 days, they're just trying to get organized. So like everyone else, we're trying to figure out who will become speaker, who will be named chairs of the major public education committees, House Public Education Committee, the House Appropriations Committee. So there's a lot of just groundwork to do in these first 60 days. But we've been monitoring everything and trying to keep our advocates informed of what's going on.
As it stands right now, is there a bill that's already been filed that you feel like might be the one, to watch? Or I know clearly we have a lot of time before the deadline to file. So do you believe that the bill that will emerge has not actually been filed yet?
It hasn't been filed yet. I know the Senate has earmarked Senate Bill 2 for a major education savings account program. I know the House does not have any major bills filed yet. There's been about 350 education policy bills that have been filed. We get about 1,000 education policy bills related each session. And by the end of every session, only about 100 of those end up passing. So we have an incredibly long way to go in the process. There's going to be another 600 or so bills filed just on public education policy alone. And so we've got a lot of work to do as those come in. We're going to see who those authors are. We're going to see who the chairs are of those committees. And then we can start to judge on what major bills are going to move through the process. And what we're really looking for is who's going to file that major school funding bill this session and the overall amount that the Senate and the House earmark for public education. Because remember, last session, the amount in the appropriations bill for public education was $4 billion for public schools. But because they didn't pass any enabling legislation, because they didn't pass a bill that kind of funded our schools, that money just kind of sat over at the comptroller's office. And in respect, $4 billion is well short of what was needed just to meet inflationary pressures and keep up pace with the program needs. So we're hoping it's going to be well north of that $4 billion number.
Okay, talk me through the difference between school funding versus education savings accounts, vouchers, and the problem with trying to tie them together, as was done in the last session. What would you, in a perfect world, like to see? Is it that you'd like to see separate bills for both and only one pass, or what is your vision of what you would like for lawmakers to do moving forward?
Yeah, first and foremost, the responsibility of the Texas legislature is to fund our public schools. Look, there's going to be a lot of debate and discussion and compromise in the next 140 days on what a voucher program or education savings account program might look like. And only time will tell if they have the votes for that. But what I hope members, returning and new members, kind of look to is the policy outcomes they want for their state. Because we have we can look to other states that have passed universal voucher programs in the past handful of years. And there's been about a dozen or so that have adopted universal voucher programs. And to be honest, the receipts are in, and the policy outcomes aren't exactly what Texas really wants. Texas wants to create, if you want to create significant state budget issues, underfund our public schools, and have a vast majority of the vouchers be used by students who already attend private school, then our elected officials better be paying attention to those states, especially like Arizona. Arizona, for instance, 70 to 80% of the families using a voucher attended a private school the year before. Within 1 year of that universal voucher program kind of being implemented, there was a $1.2 billion budget shortfall for the state, primarily because of that voucher program. And because families are able to carry the balance of those accounts over year to year, 4 years after their kids graduate high school, a recent report shows that families have not spent over $360 million, or about half of the amount of the voucher program, meaning that most of those families are saving their ESAs for college and not K-12. And so by every indicator, what our legislature should be focusing on is our public schools, our 5.5 million kids, our 380,000 teachers, because if our legislature does not act, we will remain 46th in the nation in per student funding. We're $4,400 below the national average. We will remain $8,800 less than the national average in teacher pay. Look, due to 20% inflation, our public schools has lost about $9.9 billion in purchasing power since 2019. We've all seen this around our family and our households. And so we have a long way to go to make sure our schools are just held harmless and whole for the inflationary pressures put on them. In addition to that, Texas currently underfunds our special education program by about $2 billion. So Texas and our legislature has a lot of work to do. We have to keep up with inflation. We need to add about $1,500 to what is known as the basic allotment, those building blocks to how we fund students in our state. And there's a $21 billion surplus coming into this session, and another $20 billion in our state's rainy day fund. And so it's time for our legislature to act.
A couple more questions for you. What do you say to lawmakers who say it doesn't have to be one or the other? That they are, some are claiming you can fully fund schools and you can also pass a voucher program that will, they're claiming, will help just basically give families who don't have choices now a better choice. Do
Yeah,
you think that's pie in the sky?
in every other state that has passed a major voucher program over the years, as the voucher program has grown, per student funding for public education has gone down. So if you look back to the bills that were being presented last legislative session, there was a $500 million first year cost to that, but it ballooned to over $2 billion 3 years out. That's eroding from public education. As I mentioned, we need $1,500, or about $20 billion for the biennium, for just to meet inflationary pressures. So as you fund a voucher program, you are taking away from a public education program.
I think the final thing for you, you kind of alluded to this, but Governor Abbott has said we have the votes. Do you have the same sort of confidence that Governor Abbott has that there are the votes in the House to pass a voucher program?
Yeah, each session is very long. It lasts about 140 days. There is going to be a voucher bill filed. There's going to be voucher bills that pass the Senate and maybe the House committees. And there's going to be a lot of debate and discussion on both the Senate and House floor. But as I mentioned, what I hope members, both returning and new, actually do is take a look at what policy outcomes they actually want. What is the actual scope and size and cost of these programs, and how is it impacting the 5.5 million students of our state? And so only time is going to tell to see, once kind of the compromises and the debate kind of continue on this issue, what's actually going to happen.